What is Canada's Bill C-15 and why does it matter? The federal government has introduced Bill C-15 as a means to ensure Canadian law is consistent with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP. While the declaration itself has lots of support, the bill has sparked controversy. Here's an explanation as to why. First, let's understand what the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is. The declaration was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 2007. It enshrines the rights that constitute the minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of the Indigenous peoples of the world. It took almost 25 years of deliberation and negotiation by Indigenous nations, organizations, and UN member states for the declaration to pass. Many Indigenous organizations from Canada were also involved. Canada originally voted against UNDRIP in 2007, alongside the United States, New Zealand, and Australia, out of concern for the articles stipulating the right to self-determination and free, prior, and informed consent. The Canadian government at the time said the declaration was inconsistent with the Constitution. Eventually, Canada endorsed the declaration in 2010 and announced its full support in 2016. What was Bill C-262? NDP Member of Parliament and Cree lawyer Romano Saginash first introduced a private member's bill to make the laws of Canada consistent with the declaration in 2015. It was named Bill C-262. While the Liberal government eventually endorsed it, the bill never passed due to the 2019 federal election. That brings us to C-15. The Liberal government tabled Bill C-15 in December 2020. Although almost all Indigenous peoples support the declaration and its principles, there has been concern over the federal legislation and the process. First, there is very little Indigenous consultation ahead of the bill. The federal government mostly worked with the 3 national Indigenous organizations, but individual nations had limited chance to provide input. This led to many First Nations speaking out against the process, and the Assembly of First Nations not being able to pass a resolution in favor of C-15 at its winter assembly. Second, there is a large contingent of Indigenous activists and lawyers who believe UNDRIP should remain an international legal instrument rather than become Canadian domestic law. Third, the provinces have also expressed concerns about the legislation, with 6 of them sending a letter to the Justice Minister in November asking for more time for discussion on the impact of the bill among the provinces, territories, and Indigenous partners. A lot of debate is around the term free, prior, and informed consent. Some people are concerned that it means that a handful of activists could veto a resource development project even if a chief and council or a majority of members support it. That's because Bill C-15 doesn't define what consent means. Can 2 or 3 members provide or deny consent on behalf of an Indigenous nation? Is consent achieved by referendum, a band council resolution, or some other process? Is unanimity required? C-15 raises more questions instead of answering them. For the Indigenous Resource Network, we support the declaration but are concerned that C-15 as written will create uncertainty for investment in Indigenous territory. As more Indigenous nations and corporations become owners and partners in resource projects, we need to make sure Canadian laws like C-15 don't create barriers to our economic development. UNDRIP legislation needs to support UNDRIP principles. We intend to voice our concerns and suggest amendments to improve the bill when C-15 is debated in Parliament and witnesses are called. To learn more about the Indigenous Resource Network, check out our website or connect with us on social media.